Demonstration Nugget, AWS Virtual Private Cloud, or VPC. Hey everyone, Ben Finkel here, and in this nugget, we're going to take a look at one of the most important fundamental pieces of the AWS implementation, and that is your Virtual Private Cloud. Virtual Private Cloud is an isolated network inside of AWS. We're going to take a few minutes just to talk about the features and what VPC offers, but then we'll jump right into the management console and see how easy it is to create a new VPC with actually two different subnets, and then we'll deploy an EC2 instance into that VPC, exposing it to the internet so that we can access a web server on that instance. I've never had a project in my IT career that ever resided on a single instance or a single machine. Even a really modestly sized implementation was always going to require multiple machines to configure either, different roles such as front-end processing and back-end processing, or just get redundancy and availability. Once a project scales up even a little bit in size, this blows way out of proportion. It gets really complicated to manage all of the different firewall and security rules and network traffic rules that are happening between all these different computers representing all of these different processes in my implementation. Well, Amazon recognizes this, and that's why they offer us the AWS Virtual Private Cloud, or VPC. VPC is a critical piece of your AWS infrastructure, and it's one that exists right from the get-go, even if you don't realize it. Like the name implies, VPC is just a private, isolated virtual network inside of AWS, the cloud. So you set up your virtual network with a virtual subnet, and that subnet has an IP address range, and your resources, your EC2 instances, get put into that subnet and get assigned IP address ranges, firewall rules, and all sorts of other properties based on the subnet they are placed into. VPC offers a lot of power and a lot of flexibility to do a number of different things. First of all, like I mentioned, you create isolated subnets, and then you reserve IP address ranges for those subnets that get assigned to your resources. Your VPCs also allow you to set up things like routing tables, firewalls, and gateways for access to the internet. You can set up network ACLs, access control lists, and IAM security groups in order to control access to the different machines and the different services that are running on these machines. And then lastly, with a VPC, you can remotely connect it to your on-premise network using a variety of different VPN connections. One of the more confusing aspects of working with VPCs can be the difference between those two security features I just talked about, network ACLs, NACLs, and IAM security. If we take a look at how it's organized, though, I think there's a simple thing that you can keep in mind. Security groups apply to your individual instances. So data coming into or out of an instance has to go through a security group before it can go into the subnet and be routed around your various VPCs or out to the internet gateway. Network ACLs, on the other hand, apply to the subnets themselves. So data that's coming into or out of your subnets has to go through a network ACL before it can be moved on. So security groups apply at the instance level, while network ACLs apply at the subnet level. As long as you can keep those two things in mind, or keep this little diagram here in your head, you should be pretty good at understanding how to use these two different security features. I think the VPCs are better seen than talked about, so why don't we jump right into our management console and take a look at how we can work with our Amazon VPCs. So I've got the console loaded up here. I'm working in my US West Oregon region, and if we scroll down to the bottom, we see under networking VPC, isolated cloud resources. When we select this dashboard, the first thing that I want you to notice is that on both my dashboard and yours as well, you've already got a VPC. You may not have remembered setting it up, and that's because, well, you didn't set it up. But when you click your VPCs, here it is, VPC ID, yada, yada, yada. It doesn't have a name. I'm going to select right here, and I'm going to give it a name, default. And the reason I'm going to give it that name is because, yeah, it's a default VPC that was automatically created for us when we set up our account. It's highly recommended that you do not delete this default VPC. When you create EC2 instances, if you're just kind of clicking through the wizard, they'll get thrown into this VPC. Everything's kind of set up and works for you. It's configured nicely, and I would recommend you keep it. If you do delete it or get rid of it, you can always contact Amazon support to get it back. Now you see over here on the left, instead of our VPCs, you've got a lot of different things that you can set up. You have VPCs, subnets, routing tables, internet gateways. Some of these things already exist, and we're going to be using them here. If you wanted to, you could create all of these individual items by hand, going through this menu and creating each piece. If you know what you're doing, if you're an expert user of VPCs and you understand networking very, very well, that's a great way to do it. You have a very fine-grained control over all of these different features. But if you're like me and, well, networking's a little bit of a fuzzy topic for you, don't worry. Back here in the VPC dashboard, they have something called the VPC wizard. We're going to go ahead and use that to create our own VPC. Just give it a click, you'll see that first of all there's 4 different wizard options here. The first one is a VPC with a single public subnet. Then we have a VPC with public and private subnets. So in VPCs, public subnets have a connection to the Internet Gateway device inside of Amazon. It's really a virtual Internet Gateway device. And that means that every instance, every machine inside of your public subnet is going to get assigned an IP address via that gateway and will have two-way communication with the greater internet, the public internet. Whereas a private subnet does not have that connection to that gateway, which means they will only have a private or local IP address assigned to them, and they won't have any network communication, or any public internet communication rather. You can also set up a public and private subnet VPC with a VPN connection to your corporate data center, so if you need a VPN connection. And then the last one here is just a private subnet with a connection to your corporate data center. So if you just want to expand your private network outside of your on-premise data center and you don't want to have any public accessibility associated with that virtual private cloud, well, you can use this wizard. I'm going to start with the second one here, the VPC with public and private subnets, and show you exactly how we can configure this. I'll say select. The first thing I need to do right at the top here is I need to choose my overall IP CIDR block, and this is going to be the range of IP addresses that I can use for my entire VPC. Every subnet that I create is going to have to exist within inside this range. So to begin with, just take a look. It sets up for 10.0.0.0 WAC 16. That's perfectly fine. I could change that if I wanted, but there are some limits. If I try to make this WAC 15, you see it says block sizes must be between 16 and 28. So those are my limits. I'm going to leave it at 10.0.0.16. I will call it CBT VPC. All right. So first I have to set up my public subnet. I will make my public subnet 10.0.10.0 WAC 24, and I have to choose an availability zone for this public subnet. Subnets exist within a single availability zone, so I'll put it in US West 2A. The public subnet name, I'll call it public subnet 1. That'll sound good. Then I've got my private subnet. What do I want my private subnet to be? Well, 10.0.1.0 WAC 24 sounds good to me. I will also put this in US West 2A, and I will call it private subnet 1. Now down here, I can choose to use a NAT instance for my private subnet if I want. Here's what this means. This can be a little bit confusing at first. My public subnet, recall, has a connection to the Internet Gateway, and this wizard is going to set that up for me, and that means that every instance is going to have a public IP address, and I'm going to be able to control inbound and outbound traffic from the public internet to the instances inside of that public subnet. My private subnet, on the other hand, does not have that connection, which means machines in my private subnet cannot get access to the internet. Normally this isn't a problem, but if you want to be able to download something like a Windows update to the machine inside of that private subnet, it needs to be able to initiate an outbound connection to the public internet. We can use a NAT instance to do that simply by clicking that little link there, use a NAT instance, and this is going to allow me to set up something called a NAT instance, a fully configured EC2 instance inside of this subnet that I will forward traffic through in order to get public internet access from the machines in the private subnet. So those machines will not be exposed to the public internet, but they will be accessible, or they will be allowed to access the internet, again, in order to download information. I will select a T2 instance, like I said, choose my CBT Essentials Demo key pair, and then simply click Create VPC. This will run through the wizard and create all of the different items, all the different VPC pieces that I need in order for this to work. Now once that's complete, I can come right back here to my VPCs and I can see it listed now. There's the default, the one that was created for me, and there is my CBT VPC. And if I come to subnets on the left hand side, I've got the subnets that were associated. Let me expand this out so we can see it better. I got the subnets that are associated with the default VPC, as well as my public and private subnet that I associated with my new VPC. And if I select public subnet here, let's just highlight that and look down at the route table option on the bottom. One of the things you'll notice is that traffic that is not going to one of the internal subnet, or rather one of the internal IP addresses for this VPC, is going to get routed to IGW-0. What is that crazy number? That stands for Internet Gateway ID. And if I select my Internet Gateway, there's the Internet Gateway that it is pointed to. So it's pointed to an Internet Gateway that it is using to communicate with the Internet because that was the public subnet. The private subnet, on the other hand, if I select that guy here, we can see that it is pointed to not IGW, but something called ENI-4FB I-97 something B E03. What is that? That's my NAT instance. That's actually an EC2 instance. If we browse out of here and take a look at EC2, we'll see that it created this instance for me, and that instance is running the NAT translation to allow outbound internet traffic from that machine. So there it is, I-97B92E03. So that is my NAT instance inside of this subnet. So I've actually already have in my VPC a machine deployed inside of one of my subnets. Inside of my private subnet, I've got that machine deployed so that I can communicate with the internet via that NAT translation machine. If I want to create additional subnets, it's really easy to do. I simply click Create Subnet, give it a name. Let's call this one Public Subnet 2. I got to choose the right VPC. I want to choose CBT VPC. For my availability zone, why don't I choose US West 2B? That'll ensure I have nice high availability because one subnet will be in one zone, the other subnet will be in the other zone. And for my CIDR block, 10.0.20.0 WAC 24. So a separate CIDR block range. It obviously cannot overlap with any of the other subnets inside of this VPC because, what? Oh, I missed a period there. It can't overlap with any of the other subnet ranges inside of this VPC because, of course, there would be a conflict when it came to IP address assignment. So you have to make sure that your CIDR block ranges for your subnets do not overlap, but that they still exist inside of the overall VPC range. I can also create a new private subnet if I want. So I'll click here and say private subnet 2. Same thing, make sure it's CBT VPC. I will set it in US West-2B. And set it to 10.0.2.0 WAC 24 and create that. Once that's been created, we can see all of the subnets here up inside of my subnet list. And if I look at private subnet 2 and select the route table for it, yeah, I can see that's being routed through the ENI instance there. That's perfect. Public subnet 2, however, is also going through that ENI instance. It's also going through that network address translation instance, and I don't want that to happen. It's a public subnet. I want this public subnet. I want instances inside of this subnet to use the gateway. So I'm going to select, so I'm going to click Edit right here, and I'm going to change this to 7A. Click Save. And now we can see that the public addresses are going to IGW, my internet gateway, instead of that NAT instance. So now that I've got all of these subnets created, how do we deploy an instance inside of them? It's actually really easy. Back in my EC2 dashboard here, if I simply launch a new instance using the wizard, and we can select an AMI, an Amazon Linux instance, T2 is great. Under the Configuration Details tab, notice that I have a choice for the network here. I can pull down which VPC I want to create this in, and notice the default was already chosen as the default because, yeah, when you create an EC2 instance, it has to be in a VPC. You can't create one without a VPC. So AWS, make sure that there's one created called default and that it's there for you. But I want to put this in VPC. Which subnet do I want to put it in? Let's put it in public subnet 1. How does that sound? And the auto-assign public IP address, I'm going to say enable. So it's simply going to auto-assign a public IP address to this machine so that I have a route to access it from, well, from our desktop. Something else I wanted to hear is down in my advanced details. I'm going to paste in some user data. Specifically, this is a script that is going to launch, if I scroll to the top here, it's going to launch PHP, MySQL, and Apache. It's going to install these things on the server, make sure it's up and running because I want this to be a web server. That's why I put it in the public subnet, right? If I come all the way over to step number 6, where I can configure my security groups, I have to make sure that I either select an existing group, I don't really have one, or create a new one, and add in the HTTP rule to allow HTTP access to this machine. So recall that security groups apply at the instance level. So I'm setting up the security group for this instance, basically the firewall to allow HTTP traffic in. And we covered this in a little more depth in our demo on the EC2 Management Console. All right, that all looks good. I'm going to click Launch. I will use my existing key pair that I already have. Select Launch Instance. And that will go ahead and launch this instance for me. And after a few minutes, it should be up and running, and I should be able to browse to it from the web. So now that it's up and running, if I want to make sure that it is ready to go and serve up web pages, you can recall that I can go to Instance Settings and get Instance Screenshot to see if, yeah, there it is. It's waiting for me. So in order to view my web page, I'm simply going to select the instance and make sure I get the right one. I don't want to get the NAT instance. I want to get the one that I just set up in my public subnet. I'm going to grab this public DNS here, this crazy little public name that it gave it. And I'm just going to paste that into my browser, and there is my Linux AMI test page. Awesome. I installed PHP as well, so if I go to phpinfo.php, I got to spell it right, of course. PHP version 5624. So there's my instance up and running. Because I placed it into the public subnet, which had a connection to the internet gateway, I have access to it from a public IP address. You can see that public IP address right here. And because I set up the security group to allow traffic on port 80, I was able to browse to it from my local desktop. So that completes this demonstration nugget on AWS Virtual Private Cloud, or VPC. Just to recap, a VPC is a critical, fundamental part of your AWS deployment. It creates a logical, isolated network inside of the cloud for your EC2 resources to be deployed into. You've got a VPC for all of your EC2 resources, even if you didn't realize it because of the default that was set up for you. Creating a new VPC is a snap. It can be done with the wizard inside of the management console. And deploying an EC2 instance inside of an existing VPC is as simple as choosing it during the configuration. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.